Welcome to the Dare to Multiply podcast. On this podcast, we help passionate Jesus followers become courageous, obedient disciples who impact their communities for the kingdom of God. I'm your host, Cynthia Anderson, a disciple multiplication coach and trainer.
And I'm Jen Chang, a disciple maker and coach based here in Thailand. We have some amazing topics and guests coming up, great people who are taking risks to launch new discipleship movements in their areas. We're excited to learn from them and introduce you to their ministries.
So if you're new here, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any great tools or content coming your way. And I also want to mention we've just introduced a new community and exclusive access channels for those who want to explore further or dive deeper into our disciple-making content. Check that out at multipliersmindset.com/DTM membership.
Many disciples of God, especially those of us who want to multiply, we want to do great things for God. And so often we don't know what that looks like. And the model that's often given to us is that of a megachurch. We need to build a worship service that's bigger and bigger and bigger. Every Sunday it gets larger, every Sunday it gets more robust. But in this interview, we ask the question, what happens when we let that megachurch vision, that megachurch dream, that desire to be great, what if we let that die? What could fill its place? In this episode, we talk with Lucas Pulley, who is the executive director of the Tampa Underground Network. This network is around 100 more than 100 microchurches all around the world of disciples who receive a calling, who are sent out by the underground, and who follow the calling that God has placed on their lives day in and day out. And in the aggregate, see some amazing things happening. They're seeing the poor served. They're seeing justice fulfilled in communities of the oppressed. They are sharing the gospel in the hardest to reach places, and they're doing this all in the West. And so today, as we explore this topic with Lucas Pulley, we're going to talk about things like how to develop leaders in a microchurch, how to network these churches together. What is the definition of a church, and what's the way that we can empower these churches to continue to persevere, to innovate, and take risks? So we hope you enjoy this interview.
Are you busy but not seeing the fruit you long for? Dissatisfied with your present level of impact on those around you? Or frustrated with traditional methods of discipleship that don't seem to be effective? If so, the Getting Started in Disciple-Making Movements course may be just what you need. Inside the Getting Started program, you'll get access to a step-by-step proven approach to making and multiplying disciples. Not only will you receive 25 short and practical video teachings spread out over 6 modules, but you'll have a chance to connect with others for group coaching via our monthly Zoom calls. And even more importantly, you'll become part of a global community of like-minded people from all over the world who are passionately committed to following Jesus and impacting others around them. If you want to get unstuck and begin moving forward as a disciple who makes disciples, I encourage you to go to courses.dmmsfrontiermissions.com and sign up for this powerful program today. And now to today's episode.
All right, so today I'm here with Lucas Pulley. He's the executive director of the Tampa Underground Network. It's a network of around 100 microchurches in the Tampa Bay area, but he also coaches internationally and beyond that network. So today we're going to talk about microchurches. So some of the vocabulary might be a bit different than the CPM, DMM methodology that we normally talk about. But on this podcast, on Dare to Multiply, we care about highlighting all the different ways that God is multiplying disciples, regardless of methodology or terminology. And there are really some incredible things happening in Lucas's network and other microchurch networks around the world. So we're excited to learn from you, Lucas. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so just to get started, just to set a foundation, I'd love to hear you explain, what do you mean by microchurch movement? So how would you describe a microchurch to someone who's maybe only experienced traditional models? And then two-parter, how did you personally, you and your family, get involved?
Yeah, so we would say in the underground world, it's good just for context, the underground itself. When people say what is the underground, we would say the underground is simultaneously two different things, which is why it can be sort of hard to explain. The underground is, on the one hand, a decentralized network of these microchurches. It is a relational coalition fellowship of missional leaders. And that network of microchurch, we would say a microchurch should not exist in isolation. That's why networks exist. That it's possible to be a network of isolation, but it's not necessarily good or healthy long term. And in the DNA of a microchurch is multiplication. So if you go about the work of microchurches, you're going to stumble into a network, whether you want to or not. You're going to have numerous of them. What do you do with those? And instead of collapsing them all into a centralized thing, like a tractional thing, grouping them all together, how do you keep them released to pursue what God's calling them to do in small ways intentionally? So that's why the underground, in one hand, is a decentralized network of those autonomous microchurches. The underground is also a platform of services that exists to serve that decentralized network of microchurches, whatever they need. So it's sort of basically like a little local missions agency that exists to serve everyday, ordinary people to listen to Jesus about to whom they are sent. And whenever they feel like they have an answer to that question, the whole apparatus kicks into gear to help them plant a missional witnessing community in the harvest among the unreached, and see if a microchurch might emerge in that context. So what are those microchurches? Those microchurches are satisfy what we call the ecclesial minimum. That's a theological investigation of what are the minimal required elements that collide together to make up this thing that we call church. What's this sort of mysterious threshold that something can cross where it goes from not a church to a church? Like, what is that? So in the business world, some people would call this like a minimum viable product. We try to avoid businessy terms or something like that, but I think it's important for church leaders of any kind to be able to identify a theologically discerned framework for a minimal ecclesiology, because that minimum is what helps things scale and multiply in simplicity. If we don't state and clarify our ecclesial minimum, the people around us, ourselves included, will absorb or inherit an ecclesial minimum, a minimum expectation of what a church is, that's probably a little bit more bloated than what the New Testament would suggest.
That's a good word.
So we've tried to cultivate a community over 20 years that when they hear the word church or think of the phrase church planting, they imagine something that they themselves can do. Their imagination for the term does not immediately disqualify them from being able to do it. And the ecclesial minimum is what helps somebody have that type of imagination. So our ecclesial minimum is worship, community, and mission. We would say those three things collide together to make a microchurch. And what we mean by those words, because those words mean different things to different people. So briefly, we would say by community, we mean life on life, intentional, interdependent community. We don't mean meet once a week and have a WhatsApp thread. We would say, like, you have to have enough overlapping life together to do the one another's. So it's an intentional community. And by worship, we don't mean praise and worship. Not every microchurch is banging on a guitar. We mean Romans 12 worship. We mean that intentional community is laying down their lives together individually and collectively in submission to the lordship of Jesus as their spiritual act of worship. So it's an intentional community surrendered entirely to the lordship of Jesus and pursuing together some piece of the mission of God in the world together. And that mission is to proclaim and demonstrate the kingdom of God among the lost and the poor. So every microchurch is sort of born out of an origin story of calling. Microchurches don't necessarily get started out of recruiting volunteers. No, there's not a single person that's like, somebody asked me to start a microchurch, so I did. They're not necessarily born out of training. So sometimes we can start to think that what multiplies disciples is training competency. They're actually sent by the training. And that wouldn't be the case for us either. Training is good. Even volunteering is good, but they are not a sufficient source of our sending. So every microchurch is actually born out of an origin story of listening to and attuning to a missionary sending that all of us have. And when they hear that from the Lord, when they have some clarity about that from the Lord, they go with a vision, not as an itinerant missionary, but with a vision of microchurch planting.
That all really excites me. So what I'm hearing you say is this ecclesial minimum allows microchurch to be defined in a really clear way,
Yes.
but also feel doable, feel like if I'm called to something, if I can hit these 3 categories, which feel very much in line with what probably Jesus calls the early church to look like, then it doesn't feel so scary to step out in boldness and to plant a microchurch.
Exactly. Right.
It makes me think about how we train Thai church planners to do house church overseas in Thailand. And we've narrowed church down to the simplest definition. And we're like, here are the 8 functions of a church. Let's check in. How many of the 8 are you doing? And it's just it's almost like a checklist where it's like, okay, this is what I know I need to work on. It's easy to coach through. It's an easy framework to understand and to maintain. And then I also loved what you said about church existing in network, a microchurch existing in a network. I think even what we've seen overseas is that people want to gather. People get excited when they see what's going on around them. And so a singular church, house church or microchurch might not be as strong or persevering without a network around them, without a body of believers even beyond them. And so I really love that. So how did you get involved?
Right. That was part B of the question. I was a college student in Southern Illinois, and I just started following Jesus a week before I went to college. And I came out of a history of like drug abuse, a lot of that stuff. And so I got to college, and my first year of college was a total wash. I sort of thought, I can follow Jesus, but I don't need to be a part of a church or a fellowship because Christians are weird. So I thought, I'm just going to do it myself. I don't need to be a part of weird stuff. And that didn't work. I basically just relapsed all year over and over again. And then I realized coming into my sophomore year, I've got to be a part of a fellowship. I became a part of a Christian ministry, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and was pretty right away discipled really well by like an older leader in the faith. I was trained as like a ministry leader, as a missionary. I mean, I felt like I was 6 months clean, and they were like, you can lead a Bible study in your dorm. And I was like, excuse me?
Yeah.
Don't I need to go to seminary? Don't I need to be clean for at least a year or something? Like, are you guys, this is irresponsible. But I had a DNA of like identity, both as a son and as the beloved of God, but also as a sent one. From really early on, I was equipped really early on. So that led up to like later in college, like our senior year of college, the leadership team of that fellowship, we felt like the Lord was asking us to do ministry around the community. So we started actually doing prison ministry, street outreach, banquet dinners on the strip. We were doing what we called front yard Bible studies with the poor. We were leading a single moms ministry, and all of that was alongside the campus ministry. We were still doing leading Bible studies inside every dorm on campus and doing large group worship service stuff. And all that stuff, Monday through Saturday, felt so alive and rich and full of God. And it felt like you could maybe read about it in the pages of Acts. And then we would go to this thing Sunday morning that felt like, what is this? What are we doing now? But now I was seeing that from the eyes of like, I wasn't necessarily brought up in that. I wasn't so I was a little bit of an outsider to that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of coming in, like I was around the church growing up, but I wasn't like given a rubric of understanding it.
Right.
And so alive to Jesus as a college student, following him Monday through Saturday, like participating in the mission of God, trained as a missionary, all this kind of stuff. And then Sunday mornings feeling like, how does this fit? I don't understand it. So we had a little bit of like disillusionment, dissonance with the church experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that started to grow into a little bit of, prophetic angst against the church, because a lot of the churches that we were a part of actually saw what we were doing Monday through Saturday as a, not just like invalid, or we didn't have permission to do that, or we shouldn't do that. But actually, they were trying to recruit us away from the work that we were doing Monday through Saturday so that we could spend more time investing in the system, folding programs, holding doors, volunteering with the worship band, that kind of stuff, because we couldn't do as much of that stuff in the weekly service because we were so busy during the week doing sort of city ministry stuff.
Right.
And that conflict to us started to boil over, and we just felt like, what is happening? And so we started to wonder, is there a way to be the church incarnationally, missionally oriented, in a way that it isn't necessarily fully obsessed in terms of resources and attention with the weekly Sunday morning thing? And that put us on this journey toward microchurch. Can we be the church in simple forms?
Right.
That are oriented around mission, oriented around the priesthood of all believers, oriented around equipping, oriented around multiplication, viable multiplication. The big Sunday morning services can't multiply. I mean, so oriented around simplicity, oriented around multiplication. So we went on after we graduated. We just kept going on about that type of life and building that kind of thing. We got 2 years into it. I felt like we were making an enormous amount of preventable mistakes. Because we were young and we didn't have leadership. We didn't have people like mentoring us to look up to. And that's when we found Tampa Underground. And I was in Illinois at the time. And we started a friendship with the Underground crew. They were about 2 or 3 years ahead of us on a similar pathway. And that grew into that. The community that I was leading in Illinois became a sister movement of the Underground network. And so we were really close with the Tampa movement, and it was 2016 that the Tampa movement asked my wife and I to move down and provide leadership for the Tampa work. So I've been with the Tampa crew for almost 10 years now.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing your story. It feels very similar to mine. I also have IV roots, InterVarsity.
That's right, IV roots.
And it did feel like my husband and I joke that when we were in college, we were already in full-time ministry. There was just so many ways to serve. There were so many opportunities, throughout the entire week. And we were attending a church that, we had to wrestle with the question of, do we join the IV small group? Do we join the church small group?
Yes.
Where do we give our time? Like,
yes.
is the accountability group we have here legit? And so there was a lot of back and forth and trying to figure out, what does it mean to serve God, to be a part of a community, to live out kind of what we see in the Bible, to live out what we see in Acts. And then, because I feel like what happens when a lot of students graduate is they're part of these very vibrant ministries and communities, and then they suddenly step into the real world, and you're left with like, well, here's my Sunday service. And if I really, really try hard, then I can form a community around me. But it becomes a little harder without the college structure. Without
100%. And I think that was part of our heart was we were all graduating. I mean, we were seniors in college. We had basically a network of microchurches. That's not the language we were using at the time because we hadn't connected with Tampa yet. So we didn't have like the theological framework underpinning all of it, the language. But we had basically a network of 12 city microchurches alongside a network of college, ministries embedded in dorms all over campus. And we were graduating. And we as a leadership team were wondering, do we just, I guess, let our careers yank us in 15 different directions and peace out? And this was fun and off we go. And might God actually want us to stay here and keep stewarding what we see him doing here?
Right.
And a lot of the wisdom that we were getting from, because we were well connected with like a lot of churches in the area. We were trying to be good partners with like the capital C church. We weren't trying to like have an axe to grind against the bride of Christ. So we had good relationships with a lot of local pastors. And a lot of like the local leaders that we looked up to, a lot of the feedback that we were getting, and I think it was coming from a good place, but a lot of that, and I think a lot of college students get this type of feedback, is essentially like, hey, I know the experience that you had in campus ministry was so vibrant. You had like life on life, intentional community. You shared everything in common. You like depended on one another. You saw each other daily in the temple courts. It looked a lot like Acts 2, Acts 4, but that's not a viable expression of faith community as an adult post-college. And at some point, you're going to have to get your head around assimilating to real faith in the adult world. And I think we just collectively felt like, no, we will not accept that. Like, I just refuse to accept that. I think there's actually a way. It's going to look different than college. Of course, we're not like living in 17-floor dorms on top of each other. That's going to change some things, 100%. And we're going to have jobs. We're going to have like 9 to 5s. We're going to have kids. We're going to have families. This is all going to change. But we don't have to lose the essence of all of it. Like, we can actually build something vibrant, beautiful together. And that, I mean, I think that was our core commitment. And that, you know, it was 20 years ago. So.
Yeah. I mean, the passion of college students has changed the world in many ways.
Yes.
I love that. So I was actually reading a blog post you wrote about letting the megachurch dream die. I think a lot of people who want to go into ministry, want to go into full-time ministry might see this is my pathway is to pastor a church and then make it huge, right? Yeah. So maybe what do you mean by letting that dream die? And then if that dream dies, what should our aspirations be as leaders and disciple makers?
Yeah, I think part of why I wrote that is because, you know, we're 20 years into interacting with microchurch leaders and microchurch network directors for 15, 20 years. And it's shocking to realize, myself included, how many of those people, like my missionary, neighborhood-based microchurch leaders, they make this paradigm shift around like the traditional church, the attractional church isn't necessarily effective at making disciples, equipping people as disciple makers. It's not very effective at church planting. It can't actually spark this thing that we call movement, renewal, revival, community transformation, these things that we hunger for. So it's almost like people shift over toward microchurch coming from a place of like strategy or effectiveness. But then when they get there, the amount of people who they put 2 years into microchurch stuff, and they feel like something's not quite right. This isn't really working. This isn't really. And if you scratch at that feeling long enough, you start to realize that what's underneath the surface there is this expectation that if we'll do microchurch stuff, simple church stuff, disciple making movement stuff, is a better path towards something exciting and big. So it's even I mean, you're in DMM conversations a lot. Even some of the undertone of some of the like DMM, CPM world is like fast, exciting, scalable, movemental, like whatever. And it's like that stuff's true, but it doesn't actually feel that way to any individual person that's a part of it. How it actually feels is ordinary, small, simple, slow. It feels so slow. It feels like, you know, and that thing, we've undergone rigorous, what Dallas Willard would say is we've undergone rigorous spiritual formation for decades. in a, because Willard would say, we're always undergoing spiritual formation
That's
all
right.
the time. You just maybe haven't decided by whom, it's happening to you. It's happening to
That's
you.
true.
So even if you come to Jesus and when you're 30, 35, it's not like you just started undergoing spiritual formation. You've just underwent 35 years of spiritual formation. Under what and for what purpose? Well, in Western American life, whether you're in the for-profit space, nonprofit space, spiritual space, educational space, healthcare space, any space that you're in, the spiritual formation that you're undergoing, part of what it does to you is it makes you feel like things that are big, fast, and exciting are inherently good and right. And as soon as you start to experience things that are slow, small, or ordinary, you can't even put words to it, but you feel like this isn't quite right. Something's wrong about this. Something is inherently wrong about this just because it feels that way. And that's the little megachurch dream, right? Even microchurch leaders, they get 2 years into it and they've got 10 people in a living room that love each other and it's beautiful and they're trying to reach their neighbors and they're faithful and they're praying, and God looks at that thing and says, well done. But we 2 years into it feel like, isn't it supposed to be more exciting? Isn't it supposed to be faster? Isn't it supposed to grow more than this? And that's that little megachurch thing inside of all of us that sort of needs to be like, it needs to be lopped off. It needs to be cut out of us.
I love that you made that distinction and you defined it, and because I think it's, we've seen it a lot. People that we train sometimes are like, we'll do the Discovery Bible study, we'll reach out and share with our neighbors, and then maybe one day we'll be a real church. Maybe one day we'll be great. Like this desire to be
this strategy
great.
or this future thing. Yes.
Right. And I think that the way of the kingdom, the way of spiritual formation is that it feels gradual and slow, because we had a mentor tell us, you can't microwave discipleship. It doesn't happen in a moment, right?
Yes.
The reason why movements feel fast is because everybody's making these slow kind of gradual steps towards holiness, towards in sanctification. And when you have a lot of people doing that all at once, it is rapid in the aggregate.
Yes.
But in the day-to-day, it doesn't necessarily
It doesn't
feel
feel
like
that way. Yes.
I mean, we wish it did.
Yes. I think if we had a chance to go back and talk to the individuals that were a part of the Wesleyan movement, the Moravian movement, the underground church expansion explosion, the revival in Wales, like if we were able to go back and talk to any of those individual people that were part of that, we look back and tell the story with excitement and viral movement, and it inspires us. But I think every individual person that was a part of it, they would be like, yeah, it's pretty ordinary, pretty slow. And it's almost like it was able to be viral and inspirational at scale because it involved millions of people who were able to commit to and persevere a life that was slow and small.
That's right. It in some ways that feels more attainable for someone who's outside looking in, right?
Yes.
I might not be able to start a giant movement, but I can obey this thing
do my part.
today. I can do my part. I can hear what God has for me today.
Yeah.
And I think a funny one that when you talk to workers on the field, even who go because of their missionary calling, and one of the biggest challenges and struggles they face is that they feel bored. They're like, like today was boring. Like I didn't do very much.
Most of my days.
No, you have 3 kids. You're never bored.
That's right.
So something that I was really drawn to as I was learning about microchurches, as I was preparing for this interview, is just the emphasis and the focus on justice and anti-racism in your microchurches. It's almost a core value that you implement from the beginning, and it's not like an add-on ministry where I feel like we often see a lot of churches do. They add on a justice ministry. So this is also a 2-parter. I seem to like these, but why is justice? Why are anti-racist efforts so important for your microchurches? And then I would love to hear a story, maybe some best practices about how you actually pursue this in your microchurches.
Yeah, so I think it's been part of our DNA since the very beginning to have a vision, an expansive vision of kingdom mission that we instill in people. I mean, I think we're sort of coming out. I think in the early 2000s and maybe a little bit later, we sort of always coming out of that cyclical conversation and evangelicalism around the binary nature of evangelism and social good in mission. And it's sort of like you sort of feel like you have to pick which one do you which camp are you in.
Right.
Are we share the gospel people, or are we like care for people's living situation and their dignity, and their social status, and what does the Bible mean by mission? Which one of these things does the Bible mean? And even if you try to say like we care about both, there's still a temptation to put them in priority. Which one comes first? So like we care about the body and human dignity to win a hearing of the gospel, or we care about we need to feed their soul first and then feed their body,
Just get them
So
saved.
I know that's right. So you can either be like extreme. It's a bit of a spectrum. You can be extremists where it's like we only care about this or we only care about this, or you can
Right.
sort of like put them in like a binary order where it's like we do this onto this or we do this onto this. And we've tried to build a community that has like an expansive vision of kingdom mission where it's like God cares about both
Right.
equally.
Absolutely.
And I actually don't think the vision of the New Testament, the vision of the script, the whole counsel of Scripture doesn't actually ask us to choose, nor does it ask us to put them in an order. It actually cares about the wholeness of all of it, and we can actually be faithful to all of it,
Right.
and follow Jesus in the contextualization of how that stuff works out in a group of people in time. And so we've tried to equip a body of people with that type of value and then let them walk out that value in context in the way that makes sense to them, with of course, like coaching and community input. And in our world, especially in a Western American environment, and an inner city environment, obviously that has implications for cross-cultural mission, racial dynamics that exist not just in our country but even in our city. I mean, how the racial dynamics and multicultural dynamics play out in Tampa Bay is going to be different than New York or Chicago or Los Angeles. And so yeah, I think it's caused our community to want to learn and understand the complex racial dynamics that might exist in the context that they're trying to reach, the people that they're trying to reach, right. and to see themselves as people not just entrusted with the task of proclaiming to the good news of Jesus among a people, but to be entrusted with the task of demonstrating the inbreaking kingdom among those people, which almost always involves peacemaking and carrying the ministry of reconciliation and believing that walls of hostility among a people can be actively tore down, not passively tore down, but can be actively identified and tore down by Jesus people. And that stuff is actually not best done on Twitter or on Facebook through 170 character tweets. It's best done in embodied, table-based, dialogical, love-centered practice that believes that the kingdom is in breaking, and that any sort of systemic or paradigmatic barrier that causes people to not have access to the gospel or to be treated less than human is something that God cares about.
Right.
And that anything God cares about is on the agenda for us.
Oh, absolutely. That's really good. And I would say a lot of people would find that really complicated when it's really just let's engage with love. Let's engage in dialogue. I mean, even let's be educated about our context. Like in Austin, where I grew up, literally a highway was built to separate white people from Black people, and that was its sole function. That's how they chose the location. And now the city reflects that.
Yeah.
And so how are we gonna engage? How are we gonna cross that highway?
Yeah.
Do you have like a story or an example of maybe a microchurch that does this pretty well, or that's learned how to engage in this kind of dialogue?
Honestly, yeah, there's some microchurches that do. If I could externally process with you for a second,
Please.
a lot of where spiritual formation in our community around racial injustice, cross-cultural dialogue, intentional cross-cultural friendship, multicultural community, a lot of that spiritual formation work happens at the network level of missional leaders. And part of that is because there are a lot of microchurches, not all of them, but I'd say probably 50-60% of microchurches actually end up being pretty homogenous. And part of that's because the microchurches are oriented around a specific mission. The community is trying to engage a people group, a geography, a cause, and they're gathering around a similar sense of calling to a people to be a witnessing community. But if micro communities, if simple communities are gathering around a sense of sending, and that's the shape of their microchurch. Well, our micro in our context, in a Western American context, a lot of times those communities are being sent to a fractured, homogenized world. So actually, like if a microchurch is sent to, let's say, the 26th block of Ybor Heights in Tampa in 2008 or something like that. Well, they're being sent to a block that's almost entirely Haitian Creole. And they're going to try to forge a house church there. Now, trying to have a house church that's intentionally multicultural, multi-ethnic or something like that, because that's a value we have, that means you got to bring in people from other places that aren't that neighborhood. And then you're trying to reach that neighborhood. And one of the barriers that the people in that neighborhood are going to have to face to become a part of your house church is I maybe don't know Jesus yet and don't have a value framework for multi-ethnic community. And you're asking me to get over that before I get to Jesus. Like, it's a barrier to me actually accessing the bread of this community, because you're asking me to confront that piece of my spiritual formation at the front door.
And it feels unsafe.
And it feels unsafe. Yeah, exactly. So it actually makes way more sense for that to be like a Haitian house church. Like, it's like an ethnically homogenous house church reaching that neighborhood. Same with people that live in South Tampa. Same with people that live in historic West Tampa. Same with people who live in university area. It's almost like there's pockets of the city that are geographically, culturally fractured. And then if you've got people that are reaching a CrossFit gym, or they're reaching a Frisbee league, or they're reaching the gang youth in the box area of Tampa, all these places that people feel sent to, a lot of times have a dominant culture, like a majority culture there.
Right.
So a lot of times what happens is our mission-oriented microchurches can often look ethnically homogenous. And that's another reason why the network is so important, why we need to have all of those microchurches network together into a city church, a church of Ephesus, a church of Tampa, that is incredibly diverse at the network identity level. And you're actually having to constantly work out multicultural conversation, cross-cultural dynamics, spiritual formation, racial justice conversations. Who in this city actually inherits certain benefits that other people don't have? Well, how do we feel about that? What do we do about that?
Right.
Housing access, education access, healthcare reform. That stuff is like alive in the room. Now, that said, there are certain microchurches at the actual microchurch level, at the house church level, or at the there's a microchurch that's reaching women in the sex industry, human trafficking work.
Right.
There's a lot of microchurch addiction recovery. There's a lot of microchurches at the actual microchurch level that they actually think embracing multicultural, racial justice, cross-cultural work at the microchurch level is actually critical to the mission and life of what Jesus is asking them to do. It's not something that they can just rely on the network level for. It's actually on the front lines of the missionality of the life of their church. So there's probably 10, 15 of those. There's my house church. I lived in a we just moved 4 months ago. But we lived for 9 years inside of a 894 unit Section 8 housing village. It was like 26 acres. It was the projects of Tampa Bay. It's called Belmont Heights Estates. It's all low income Section 8 housing. We were the only white family within like a 5-block radius, and we had generational African-American families on our block that had been there 60, 80, 100 years. We had young African-American families. We had indigenous people, Native Americans that were on our block. We had, and there were a few like Cubans, Hondurans, some of them documented, some of them undocumented.
Right.
And you got all those people in the same neighborhood. You got all those people sharing life together, and a lot of those people. And we were sort of this like neighborhood house church that I think we entered into an environment where everybody had their sort of own disparate concerns and didn't actually have any value or framework for being a neighborhood together, like engaging with each other, everybody to their corners. And we were the only ones who wanted to catalyze neighborliness, so it was like, now in order for us to do that, we just can't come in like a little bit of like white savior complex and be like, we're here to save the day. We're here to like,
here's a casserole.
Yeah, correct. A very poorly made casserole, here's our vision for the neighborhood. We sort of had to like enter into every individual story, understand where those stories and life circumstances intersect, and bridge connections with each other that made sense, and then sort of like let a community emerge from the soil. And I took it was probably 4 or 5 years of like nothing. That's slow cooker. That's crock pot. That's crock pot.
Right.
That's slow. But man, the 4 years after the 5 years of work, leaving that neighborhood was the hardest part about our move, about our transition. And beautiful community, and a community that is starting to sort of work its asset-based community development a little bit. If you're familiar with like CCDA work, it's sort of like, let's not rely outside of ourselves for the solutions that we actually have internally here. We can actually be creative and rely on each other and figure out how to create a beautiful life together based on what's already here.
Right.
So they're creating like mentoring programs, educational programs.
Wow.
We were doing property work. We were creating affordable housing in the neighborhood ourselves. We're not relying on somebody else to do that. We were home repair and construction work. We created a micro grant program in the neighborhood that prevented families from having to cross the thresholds of a cash loan shark and be saddled with 15% interest rates that would create generational debt that would be passed on to their kids and their grandkids. And that was in the neighborhood. We created that.
Amazing. That's incredible. Yeah. I think it's very much like, well, these people are poor. What do they have to offer? What can they give? Right. But we even see it we work with very, very uneducated rural church planners in parts of Thailand that are just, very impoverished, and they're so generous. They're probably some of the most generous people I know, and they give their time and they give what they have. And so to be able to support one another in really practical ways and not just be like, okay, we're here to fellowship and then we'll leave again. I think that's what you're describing is beautiful. I grew up in a very Asian expression of church. I went to a Chinese church growing up, was in the Chinese chapter or the Asian chapter of our IV ministry in college. And there was something very there's something very exciting and very safe to be like, wow, as an Asian American, I'm created in the image of God, and I express something about God that another maybe ethnic group wouldn't. And we need each other, but also we all need each other in diversity, but we can also celebrate how we are together in an affinity group or a homogenous group.
Yeah.
And so that brought tears to my eyes when you were talking about your own microchurch. It's really exciting. So I think as you see all these leaders get a calling to plant a microchurch, who go out, who start these justice and who start to engage in justice, to share the gospel, to be missional every day. I have a question about sustaining momentum. So how do you help or coach leaders in microchurches to not only just keep going, but to also keep going in risk-taking, innovation, outward focus? I think a lot of times it's easy to just slip back into what's comfortable. What used to be really innovative and pioneering will eventually feel comfortable after a certain amount of time. So what are ways that you help these house churches continue to pioneer, embrace risk, and keep going?
Yeah, I would say so. That's part of where the service platform kicks in. So we have that, and that's what I work for. I work for the service platform. I don't work for the decentralized network of microchurches. Nobody works for the network of microchurches because it's a non-entity. The IRS doesn't even know it exists. It can't be sued.
Underground.
That's right. So I work for this nonprofit platform of services that exists to help microchurch leaders start microchurches, scale and grow microchurches, multiply microchurches, and persevere the sacrificial, costly life that they've embraced.
Right.
And so we build services. Right now, the way that looks is there's a media department, there's a financial services department, there's a facilities and events coordination department that basically is shared by all the microchurches, so that if any microchurches have those needs, they don't have to build out their own internal platform, department, infrastructure to tackle those. We can build one that's shared by all of them. And then some of the other departments are coaching.
Right.
So every microchurch leader can get matched with a coach. They can have, monthly or more frequent connection, a rhythm of connection if they want. And that coaching can look all kinds of different ways. It can be check-in pastoral care. How's your marriage? How's your soul? It can be strategic planning. It can be a creative brainstorming session. It can be phase planning. And that can be a place. It's not the primary place, but that can be a place where leaders are encouraged to think outside the box, expose maybe some of their blind spots,
Right.
Try new things, spurred on to try new things. And it's where they can just be reminded, of all the difficult things they might be facing. This is worth it. And there's a huge community of people who are embracing this kind of life alongside you. There's a training department. The training department can offer people diagnostic frameworks and fresh ways to think about certain topics, like how do we build community that's more intentional, interdependent? How do we equip people to share the gospel in creative ways? How can we create a rhythm of life together as a community that sort of carries us in practice-based habits? That kind of stuff might be in the training department. So that's always giving people fresh ideas, fresh diagnostics to think about their existing community in a new way from every angle. And the one that's probably the most important in the platform of services is what we call convening environments. So it is the job of the nonprofit to create environments to convene the network of microchurches, because it's critical for the network of microchurches to get around each other, to see each other, to be around each other. But if nobody's doing that for them, who on that side calls the party, sends the email, secures the venue, gets the facility, sets up the table, sets an order of service? That's too much work. It's going to distract them from their mission, from their microchurch. So there needs to be a servant, a deacon, who calls the parties, gets the venue, sets the tables, tells everybody it's happening, and gets them in the room, and lets them, learn from each other, shared inspiration, think tank, share stories, testify to what God is doing all over the city, share one another's burdens, cry over the terrible thing that happened to them, share about the moral failure that happened in their core team that they've been with for 8, 9, 10 years. And what do we do now? And how do we pick up the pieces? If that convening environment, a microchurch is, we like to say, sufficiently the church. It is the church, but it is not efficiently the church without a network. It cannot provide everything for itself out in isolation. It needs the network. And one of the things that a microchurch needs from a network is the resources required to persevere long term. And that exists in peer-to-peer fellowship with other microchurch leaders, where every crap hits the fan in your microchurch. You need to have some people that you can turn to and say, what do I do? And when you're starting to feel like you don't want to do this anymore, and this isn't what you signed up for, which every single microchurch leader goes through within the first 2 to 3 years of saying yes to leading a microchurch, and it will happen over and over again for the next 50 years. When you hit that moment, one of the only things that gets you through that moment is getting around other people who also said yes, and those people can say back to you, me too. Yeah. And I remember when, and here's what God did. And I'm in that same spot. Let's persevere together. So we have weekly gatherings of the microchurch leaders. We have that are a little bit more, they're very simple. They're very ordinary. But then we have maybe 4 to 6 times a year, we have these larger weekend events that are like retreats, like contemplative retreats, like let's all go out and pray in the woods and meet with the Lord and hear from him.
I love that.
And every summer we get all the microchurch leaders together for what we call Leadership Summit, which is basically our way of saying every microchurch leader needs to have at least an annual day to plan, like think ahead and have some vision. And if we just tell you should do that and leave it up to you to do it, none of you are probably going to do it. So what if once a year?
It's so true.
Totally. Me too. I'm the worst of them. So it's like, what if we once a year created a weekend that was basically meant to be a planning retreat for your microchurch, but we're all doing it with each other, shoulder to shoulder.
I really like that.
So those are some of the rhythms that, you can build in place in the convening environments that keep microchurch leaders thinking about the future, taking risks, staying inspired, getting fresh ideas, and giving them the resources that they need for future crisis, that they have what they need when they hit it, instead of getting caught off guard in the crisis and not having what they need.
That's great. It's awesome that there's a supporting infrastructure, and it's all about supporting the microchurch and not the other way around.
Exactly.
I love that.
That's what we would say is the big difference between centralized and decentralized is that centralized is where the small exists to serve the big, and decentralized is where the big exists to serve the small. So the money, the power, the resources, the staffing exist to serve small things with no expectation of return. That's decentralization. Centralization is a traditional church, like a 2,000 person megachurch, deciding to do house churches. And a year after they decided to do house churches, they realize it's not resulting in higher attendance at the Sunday thing. And they decide we're not going to do it anymore. That exposes that those house churches were a centralized entity. The small exist to serve the big.
It's a good litmus test.
Yes.
About whether you're truly in about where your heart is. Again, breaking that mega church aspiration.
Yes.
I also hear how important event planners are here.
Yes.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who might feel like they have giftings that are, I'm less evangelistic, I'm less apostolic, but I can make a spreadsheet. Like these event planners, we need them so badly in Thailand. It sounds like this convening kind of gathering is so important to keeping your network going. And
the 40, 50, 60-year apparatus of seminary education has not equipped people for decentralized network leadership at all. Colleges that have nonprofit management, event coordination, project management, administrative, financial services, accounting, bookkeeping, those types of people are heavily equipped to do the work required for decentralized network leadership.
It's really good.
So much of the work is QuickBooks, project management, having a brain that knows how to think about the last 5% of an event. Oh my gosh, those people are gold. Those people are gold.
God bless those people. That's not me.
It's not me either. It's not me either.
I celebrate those people so much.
No, totally, 100%. It's like I'm the guy that's like planning a banquet dinner for a network, and 2 weeks out, somebody asks me, "Are we good to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we covered all our bases." And we show up that night, and there's no plates or forks on any of the tables.
Yeah,
that's me.
Yep, that's me too. That's a great word. Yeah, for people who feel like, oh, maybe I don't have the giftings or the strengths or the talents to be a ministry leader, a spiritual leader, like God needs the kingdom needs all the gifts.
Totally.
Okay. Last question, and I'm just going to combine all my last questions, but for anyone who might be feeling stirred or excited about microchurches, this might be a new concept. What are some practical next steps that they can take? And then also, do you have any resources that you would recommend for our listeners to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, I think just somebody that's stirred, that's wondering like, oh gosh, like this maybe this puts language to what I've been feeling, and I'm inspired by this. What do I do next? Again, we would say that the origin story of every microchurch is this vertical encounter with Jesus around missionary calling, missionary destiny, that God actually has a people to whom he is sending all of his disciples. And usually the first step for people is like, I dare you to listen to him about that. He's probably been saying it to you for years, but your ears have maybe not been attuned to that question.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we actually don't, the sort of the secret behind the curtain is that we don't actually care that much about microchurches. We care about people, individual people, awakening to their God-given mission and deciding to live a full life of faithfulness, not success or failure, a full life of faithfulness to his missionary sending. And whether or not a microchurch emerges among that people group is not actually up to us. It's up to God. And so nobody actually plants microchurches. They plant themselves in faithfulness. And whether or not a microchurch comes out of it, that's God's business. You can, anybody listening can start there. Anybody can start with listening to the question of calling and taking the tiniest baby steps of faithfulness to say yes to whatever he says. And in terms of like resources, if there's any way that we can help individual leaders or teams or churches that want to think more about running down this road, we have like limitless, unmentionable resources available. And the best way to find all those things is usually by going to undergroundnetwork.org, where you can find that we're happy to offer you free monthly webinars around some of this stuff. Free, 2 or 3 times a year, we do digital learning communities where you can gather with people from around the country, around the world, and get under the hood and learn more about this stuff and find out how it might look in your context. You can come visit Tampa and spend a week and just be part of our community and taste it and see it and feel it. We'll come to you if you want us to come to your city and run a calling lab or run a microchurch lab or do some training. Or just sort of like see your world and speak into your story a little bit. So there's a lot of resources. There's books, like you mentioned. There's a microchurches book. There's an underground community story book. If you want to learn more about us or about microchurches, but all that stuff can be found just by going to that website first.
That's great. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lucas. It seems like for everyone listening, there's that action step was the lowest bar you could go. Just listen to God. He's calling you to an assignment. He has a work set aside for you. And so take that bold step to just sit and listen and respond. And that website again is undergroundnetwork.org. I'll link it in the notes. And yeah, thank you so much, Lucas, for joining us. This was exciting. It was, I think a lot of times I can feel like, is there a hope for the Western church? Is there, I can get really, I can get stuck in my head, but this was a really hopeful interview. I am excited to see what God does with microchurches, with the underground, with your coaching, and I hope many join your efforts.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with you today. This was great, and I'm hopeful with you.
Awesome. I'll be back with a summary for all you listeners, but thanks so much for tuning in.
Are you ready to unlock your potential as a disciple maker? Then it is time to dive deeper into the principles that are changing lives with the Multipliers Mindset course. This transformative course accompanies the book, The Multipliers Mindset, Thinking Differently About Discipleship by Cynthia Anderson. These lessons will help you not just through reading about a multiplying movement, but how to actively live out a lifestyle that leads towards movements. And here's the best part. It comes with a practical workbook, which is designed to take your learning even further. This workbook guides you step by step to apply what you learn and to impact the lives of lost people around you. With easy-to-follow steps, uplifting lessons, and timeless truths from the book, this course equips you to make disciples and to start groups that multiply. Visit multipliersmindset.com to step further into the work God is calling you to do. Let's multiply together.
I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Lucas. I know that I really did. I left that time feeling energized and excited. To be frank, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what's going on in America and in the Western church. Sometimes I look at that context and I think, man, these how can small churches multiply? How can we multiply in the West when there are all these mega churches that will pull people in? And so to talk to Lucas and see, wow, these micro churches are not only existing, but they're thriving, they're multiplying, and they're addressing some of the most horrific injustices in the world in really loving and compassionate ways. And it's just ordinary people who are trying to impact their neighbors or their friends or a people group or a cause that the Lord has given and put on their hearts. And so I am feeling encouraged. I'm feeling hopeful and excited. Some takeaways that I have from this talk are, first, that every single person has a calling on their lives from God and can be sent out in some form of missionary work. That it's not limited to pastors or people with seminary degrees, but all these microchurches started simply from people hearing from the Lord, hearing a calling for their lives, hearing a calling for who they're supposed to spend their lives for, and then obeying simply. And Lucas and his team and the underground, they're there to support them, but every microchurch follows the calling that God gives to them. And it's this faithful obedience that helps them to continue to multiply and to thrive and to address some of the really difficult problems of social injustice. The second thing that really struck me was that these microchurches, even though they might feel small, have a huge passion and vision to not only reach the lost, but also to do good, to not forget the oppressed and not forget the poor. And so we discussed how there doesn't have to be this dichotomy, this give and take between sharing the gospel and social good, but you can start a microchurch, you can start a church with the DNA of pursuing the kingdom of God fully. And sometimes that requires really, really hard work of understanding the context of injustice or racism that undergirds a lot of these social problems and addressing these things with love, with compassion, with dialogue, with patience and humility, to not come in being ready to solve everything, but to listen first. And I think that the ability to preach not only the gospel, but the kingdom of God and the elimination of social injustice is something really powerful about this movement. The third thing that we talked about was how many times in especially the Western context, we think of megachurches, and we think of these big established uh, structures where the small group, the small ministries all serve to exist, the big church service, the big Sunday service. But here in microchurches, the big organization is all ministries created in support of the small. The microchurch is actually is sufficient in and of itself, and the services that Lucas and his team provide are all to serve these smaller efforts and not the other way around, not to take from the church, not to take from the microchurch, but to give, whether it's extra coaching, extra training, data, web services, whatever it is, that there are people who in a very deacon-like ministry are trying to prop up these churches that are multiplying. The last thing we talked about was how not only is starting microchurches important, but continuing to persevere and to take risks and to innovate is just as important. And around that 2-year mark, things start to get hard. People start to soul search a little bit. And so one of the keys to keeping these microchurches going is to actually network them, to create these spaces of convening, of helping everyone see, oh, I'm not alone in this endeavor. I'm not alone in what I'm trying to do. This hard thing that I have encountered, someone else has encountered it too. Or this question that I have, someone else has an answer. And so to be able to plan and pray and encourage and coach each other mutually among the microchurch leaders is really key to keeping everyone going forward. And so finally, Lucas encouraged everybody to get started. If you feel like this is something that the Spirit is stirring in your heart to be involved in, just make the time, make the space to sit and listen to the Holy Spirit and ask God, what is the calling you have for my life? What is it that you have for me to do? And then whatever you hear, whatever He says, begin to faithfully obey. You don't need the underground. You don't need a system or a structure to affirm that you can follow and obey the voice of God in your life, the calling of God over your life. You can just do it now.
That's all we've got for this episode of Dare to Multiply. One thing that would really help both us and other people who might like to listen in is for you to rate and review the podcast, if you haven't done that yet, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'd also love to connect with you on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Feel free to message me with any topics, questions you'd like addressed, or guests you'd like me to interview. Until next week then, please remember, no matter how ordinary you feel, God's dreams for us are always bigger than we can imagine. Let's dare to trust Him for a greater harvest.